Beginner novel writers are a lot like sea turtles that have just hatched. They spend most of their time crawling through sand and occasionally get picked off by seagulls. And just like baby sea turtles, 9 out of 10 people who set out to write a novel will never finish it. Well, for the baby sea turtles, it's reaching the ocean, but you get my point. There are a lot of things that can trip somebody up when they're working on their first novel. Today, we're going to go over 5 common things that will trip up beginners and some ways that you can avoid them. What you shouldn't avoid is subscribing to my channel because you'll get more content like this. All right, thing number 1 that will trip up a beginner writer: unrealistic time expectations. Essentially expecting to write a novel faster than is reasonable too. I've heard from quite a few people that when they sit down to write, they have this voice in the back of their head that says, if you can't write the entire novel in this one session, then it's not worth sitting down at all. On the face, this seems completely ridiculous if you're an experienced writer at all, because you know that writing a novel in a single sitting is not something that happens. But I do think a lot of beginners don't necessarily understand exactly how much time it takes to write a novel. I mean, a lot of professional writers who are like published produce 1 or 2 novels a year. That's probably about the amount that most professional writers produce. I know there's some prolific writers who produce more than that, but like a year to get a novel written is not an excessively long amount of time. And these are professional writers who are experienced, which means they probably write faster than a beginner. And because they're professional, they probably have way more time to write than somebody who has a family and a full-time job or goes to school full-time. All that to say that you should give yourself plenty of time to get your novel written. Honestly, I think the fastest you can expect to get a first draft done is like 90 days. 90 days, assuming you write 1,000-ish words a day, will get you the 80 to 100,000 word length of a novel. Writing a novel is not something that you can get done in a very short amount of time. When you decide to become a writer, you're essentially making a lifestyle decision. You're essentially saying that I'm going to spend some time every day or most days writing for the foreseeable future. You will have more success writing consistently for shorter amounts of time over a longer period of time than you will trying to crank out an entire novel over the course of a weekend. This takes time, and consistent effort over 6 months or a year will lead to more success and will often get you a better product at the end of it. Next up, thing number 2 that can trip up a beginner novelist: unrealistic quality expectations. I have a folder on my computer which contains a lot of my earlier writing, and I am deathly afraid of opening it and reading any of it. My first efforts at writing caused me physical pain to read. Mind you, my current writing sometimes causes me physical pain to read, but it's in a different part of the body, so that's how I know that I've improved. Your job as a first-time novelist is not to write a good novel, it's to write a novel. Finishing a novel, or something that could be loosely called a novel, will do more for improving your skills than trying to write a perfect novel. I think we hear a lot of stories quite commonly about like debut authors who write this novel and everybody loves it and it goes to #1 on the bestsellers list and things like that. We hear those stories and we assume that our first efforts need to live up to that high level of quality. The reality is, for 99.9% of people, the first novel you write is not going to be that great. The second and third and possibly fourth or fifth one you write is also probably not going to be that great. It takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, and a lot of poor writing to turn you into a good writer. There's no way to avoid that practice. You're gonna write probably 1,000,000 words that aren't that great before your skills really start to advance. Oftentimes when you see these debut authors who write this amazing novel, it's either a case where they're just super talented and are these unicorns that are better than 99% of other people, or it's not actually their first novel, or if it is their first novel, they've revised it like 27 times and have written 27 different drafts of it. So while it's the first novel they're publishing, they've effectively written 27 other novels. Don't concern yourself with the quality of the first novel that you produce. It is almost a universal truth that it's going to be not that great. Next up, thing number 3 that can trip up a beginner writer: using a method that doesn't work for you. The internet is loaded with these people telling you how to write a novel and giving you all this advice and these different methods and ways to do things. They're really problematic. You should mostly ignore them. Some people, and I found this especially with professional writers, will try to hem people into one specific method for writing a novel. They'll tell you that this is the only way to do it. No other way will work. Every other way is crap. You have to do it this way. And it's probably true that that specific method works for them, but every single writer is different and different methods work for different people. So if you follow Stephen King's advice that you shouldn't do an outline, you shouldn't plot out your novel beforehand, you should just sit down and write it, but in doing that, you really don't like it and you feel like you would much prefer to have an outline to work from, then you should work from an outline. Part of the process of writing your first novel is figuring out what method works for you. There are as many different methods as there are writers out there. Different people have different preferences and ways that help them work best. You should not feel obligated to follow somebody's method because they say it's the best method. You should find something that works for you. Whether that's using an outline or not using an outline, using a plot structure, not using a plot structure, even what software and like how you write the novel. You might prefer to write by hand, for instance, rather than writing on a computer. I will caution though that at least when you're starting out, the process of writing is going to feel a little bit awkward if you've never done it before. So a lot of the methods that you try will feel like they aren't going to work, but it's really a case of you just not being used to the process. As a beginner writer, you're going to want to do a lot of experimenting to see what works for you, what you like and what you don't like. So feel free to experiment, give things a chance, really evaluate if they're working, keep doing what's working, and stop doing what isn't working. Next up, thing number 4 that can trip up a beginner novel writer: focusing on too many things at once. Writing a novel is a lot like driving a car. There's a lot of things you kind of need to pay attention to and monitor as you're going. You know, you got the steering wheel, you need to make sure your speed is right, you got to make sure you're not running out of gas, you need to check your rear view mirrors, you need to make sure you're maintaining the proper following distance, you need to check Instagram on your phone. Don't do that last thing. Don't use your phone when you're driving. Writing a novel is kind of the same way. You've got to be thinking about, is the pacing right? Does this dialogue sound like something the characters should say? Should they be doing some actions after they say this thing? Did I properly describe what they're wearing? How does this scene fit in with the rest of the story? At any given point as you're writing, there's so many things you need to keep in mind, all the way from the sentence structure, the individual words you're using, all the way up to the broader plot of your overall novel. Trying to keep all of these things straight as you're writing is going to be incredibly overwhelming for a beginner. Learning to write is really about offloading conscious decisions about the writing to your unconscious mind. You kind of learn things through muscle memory and start doing certain things automatically. This takes time and it does take conscious attention to these things, but it's better to sort of learn things one at a time rather than trying to get good at everything all at once. You're going to have things that you naturally gravitate to and things that you find more challenging. For example, you might find writing dialogue is really easy and comes quite naturally to you, but maybe writing character descriptions is really hard. My recommendation is for any given chapter, just try to focus on getting one thing right. So if it's a dialogue exchange, if that's the main focus of the scene, Just focus on maybe getting the core component of the dialogue. If you're introducing a new character in a scene, maybe put a lot of attention on the description of that character. Don't try too hard to get everything right, because it's just going to be overwhelming and it's going to trip you up. Through time, you'll start doing certain things automatically. You'll start getting better at different aspects of the writing, and you won't have to consciously think about these things. They will be offloaded unconscious, and they'll just sort of happen automatically, and you'll be able to focus on the areas that you need to improve. And lastly, thing number 5 that will trip up a beginner writer, and this is by far the biggest one, and that is not getting started. I mentioned this statistic in a lot of videos because I find it quite interesting. Often when they survey people, just the general public, about whether or not they want to write a novel at some point in their life, something like 75 to 80% of people say that they do want to write either a book or a novel sometime in their life. Of all those people who want to write a novel, very few of them ever actually start. But of that group, there are people who do want to write a novel. They've started doing some research and looking at different methods and started learning some different things, but they haven't actually sat down to write anything. In order to be a beginner, you have to start at something. You have to begin something. Not getting started is usually the result of fear, and fear can come disguised as a lot of different things. Fear can make you prepare excessively, so you'll end up with this feeling of like, well, maybe if I just watch one more video or take one more class or read one more book about prose, then I'll be ready to start writing. Fear can also come in the form of perfectionism, this worry that if you sit down to produce something, it's not going to turn out the way you thought, it's not going to live up to your expectations, so that keeps you from starting. The way to overcome all of this is quite simple but difficult to do, and that is just to start. Don't think about it, just sit down. Whatever idea you have, wherever you're going to start it, whatever characters or plot or whatever, just sit down and start writing chapter 1 of your novel. Starting even with just a little bit of effort, just getting a little bit past the starting line is often enough to overcome that fear and get you over that hump and get you moving. You don't need to write 80 to 100,000 words to be a novel writer. You just need to write the first 100. You just need to get started. You need to have a work in progress. No amount of preparation is going to make you feel ready. At a certain point, you just need to get started. Sit down and start writing. Yes, it'll be hard. Yes, it probably won't turn out the way you hoped it would, but at least you'll be started. You'll be on the correct path, you'll be making progress, and that at the end of the day is the most important thing. Just like you watching this video was the most important thing that you could do. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.